Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Grafton Select Board meeting, August 11, 2020, 7:01 p.m. At this time, want to kind of go over some ground rules as we will be conducting this meeting through Zoom. And I have a couple of housekeeping things that I have to read publicly. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, the various boards and committees representing the Town of Grafton will conduct their public meetings and hearings via remote participation. No in-person attendance or members of the public will be permitted. As we will be using Zoom meeting, I just want to warn everyone that everything that is here is on for the public. So if you're going to share your screen, please be cognizant that the public has access and will see whatever's on your shared screen. Just some additional protocols and ground rules here. All participants that are entering this meeting that are participating, please assure that you've named your first and last name for your Zoom meeting. Just for the sake of everyone understanding that this evening, Doreen DeFazio, our Vice Chair, will be managing the Q&A session. We will only be answering questions and answers on the agenda topics that are here today. In addition to that, we will be, as we're moving through the agenda, we won't be going back and asking questions. So after each agenda item, before the board takes any action, we'll make sure we read up on the questions and deal with those on a one-by-one basis. In addition to that, I'll have Colleen Roy, who will be reading in participants and also be reading correspondence later in the meeting. As the chair, please identify when you want to have the floor, and I will give you the floor. I ask that everyone do this one at a time and that you keep your screens mute or your microphones muted to prevent any background noise from causing any disruption. So without further ado, I would like to read into the participants that are going to be present for this meeting this evening. When I call out your name, please call in the affirmative that you're here. Panelists for the Select Board, Ms. DeFazio.
DeFazio present.
Mr. Often.
Often present.
Ms. Roy.
Roy present.
Mr. Frisbee.
Here.
Peter Carlson is here. Next up, we have Vincent Loguidis. Did I say it? Loguidis?
It's actually Laura Napolitano from National Grid.
Okay, I was going to call that next. Thank you, Mr. Napolitano. Laura Napolitano is present. Mr. Mead.
Raise here.
Mr. Mueller. Mr. Mueller, if you could just answer in the affirmative that you're present.
I'm sorry, I'm here.
Thank you very much. Ms. Garvin.
Karen Govin here.
Mr. Finn.
Dan Finn here.
Mr. Magnet. Mr. Briggs. Mr. DeShanes.
Andy DeShane here.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so first up, thank you very much, everybody, for making it. I've got a couple of announcements I would like to read before we get going. Just a reminder that the last day to register to vote for the September state primary election to be held on Tuesday, September 1st, 2020 is Saturday, August 22nd, 2020. On Friday, August 7th, Governor Baker signed an updated gatherings order, which will reduce the limit on outdoor gatherings from 100 to 50 people. Indoor gatherings will remain at 25 people. Apply these limits to all types of gatherings of both public and private property, and require face coverings where more than 10 people from different households will be mixing. Last but not least, just the last minute addition. As you all aware, back last week on the 4th, Grafton endured a storm that brought down trees and caused widespread power outages. I'd just like to thank National Grid, our DPW, police and fire departments for the continued commitment in serving Grafton during this need. While there are many who could participate in restoring services individually, I would like to give out a sincere thanks and point out the assistance of Cindy Ide, who works for the town of Grafton in the town administrator's office. During the following day, she was fielding calls from both residents and businesses who were impacted and helped coordinate efforts and get in contact for National Grid. But I would like to call out Cindy's efforts about her involvement with assisting the Crescent Manor home up on Pigeon Hill, where they lost both power and their backup systems. And she assisted in coordinating efforts to have National Grid prioritize in restoring power to the residents who reside there. And I just want to give a huge shout out to Ms. Ide, and I want to thank her again for her tireless efforts for Grafton. Thank you. Next up, do we have any public comments, Ms. Roy?
No public comments.
All right, thank you. Okay, so first up on our agenda this evening, we have a public hearing for a poll petition for South Street. Prior to taking the motion, Ms. Roy, would you read the legal notice for us, please?
Yes, the select board will hold a public hearing on the request of National Grid to locate poles, wires, and fixtures, including necessary sustaining and protecting fixtures along and across the following public way. South Street, install 2 SO poles on South Street and remove 1 SO pole on Worcester Street, beginning at the point approximately 115 feet north of the center line of the intersection of Church Street and continuing approximately 20 feet in an easterly direction. Install 2 35C2 stub poles to support the P1 on South Street and P1 on Upton Street, which previously had tree guys that failed. And to lay and maintain underground lateral cables and wires in the above or intersecting public ways for the purpose of making connections with such poles and buildings as each of said petitioners may desire for distributing purposes. The public hearing will be held on August 11th, 2020 and will take place via Zoom. The meeting link will be posted on the August 11th agenda. The Selectmen's meeting begins at 7 p.m. The purpose of this hearing is to provide an opportunity for public comment. Anyone wishing to may attend via Zoom. Grafton Select Board. And I will take a motion, or I'm sorry, I'll move the board vote to open the public hearing for the South and Upton Street poll petition for National Grid.
Second.
The motion made and seconded. Any discussion? All those by roll call vote, please. Mr. Frisbee.
Aye.
Mr. Roy.
Roy, aye.
Mr. Fazio.
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Often.
Often aye.
Peter Carlson, aye. Okay, declare the public hearing open. We have a representative here from National Grid, Mr. Napolitano. I'd like to give you the floor and just maybe give us an update or a description of what you're asking for us.
Hey there, everybody. So basically what she read was exactly right. The reason we need to put the 2 stub poles across the street from the poles 1 is to support those particular poles, because it's going around a curve to the right. We have to offset the tension on the left so that those poles don't come crashing down.
All right. Thank you. And do you know approximately where the 2 locations of the poles that will be picking up tonight?
The ones that we're installing?
Yes, again, just precisely like whereabouts, can you share with us? Just
Well, looking at Google Maps, honestly. So apparently there was a tree guy going to the tree that's right on the bend of South Street and Upton Street. So we'd be putting one, it looks like on either side of that tree, or closer to the sidewalk, basically, or that little parking area. It looks like a parallel parking area there. So we'd be putting them right on that corner there. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
can everyone see that map all right? Does anyone have any questions? Mr. DeShanes.
Not a question, but a comment. So we reviewed this out in the field. I reviewed it because it's partially going to be going back to polls on the library project. Paul Canorio was there. I've reviewed this with the Historic District Commission as well, so they understand where the polls are going to be. So there's been a bit of discussion about where these polls are exactly, and they're actually staked out there right now. There's a stake in the ground in both locations for where these are going to go.
Okay. All right, does anybody from the public have any questions or comments? Mr. Fazio, do we have any questions in the Q&A?
There's none, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, great. Does the board have any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. All right, could I get a motion to close the public hearing?
I move the board vote to close the public hearing for the South and Upton Street poll petition.
Second,
Motion made and seconded. By roll call vote, please. Mr. Prisby?
Yeah.
Ms. Roy?
Roy, I.
Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, I.
Mr. Alston?
Austin, aye.
Carlson, aye. Okay, declare the motion carried, closing the public hearing. Okay, at this point, we have a motion in front of us for the board to approve or deny the poll petition as presented. At this point, if there isn't any other questions or comments, do we want to take a motion?
I move the board vote to approve the poll petition as presented for South and Upton Street.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussions on the motion? All right, not seeing any. Okay, all those by roll call vote. Mr. Prisby?
Yeah.
Ms. Roy?
Roy, I.
Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, I.
Mr. Alston?
Austin, aye.
Peter Carlson, I declare the motion carried for the approve the poll petition. Mr. Napolitano, I believe you're all set. Thank you very much for coming in this evening.
Thank you so much. Y'all have a nice evening.
You too. All right, next up on our meeting, we have library change orders that were in our packet. I have Mr. Deschaines here, who is our owner of project management for the project. Mr. Deschaines, if you want to have the floor and just give an overview. I know we have two pieces of business we have to take up tonight.
Right, yep. So the first one is some pretty straightforward change orders. These are, oh, could you keep sharing that? Sorry.
Oh,
I don't
sure,
know.
absolutely,
Everybody else can read it too, but I've got it sitting behind here, but it's easier.
absolutely.
It's up
This is
there.
fine.
Thank
Yep.
So change order number 12 covers a few, as I wrote in here before, a few smaller items that fall into some sort of final coordination, both with the contract drawings and also with the existing building. So there's a few things in here that are all sort of captured under this one change order. It's all pretty straightforward stuff. Like, again, there's some things that you don't know until you open up the building and you find that things are a little bit different. And there are also a few things just from the documentation side of things that because of a final independent code review, some things changed in the drawings, and those happened after the project had already gone out to bid. So there's just a few minor things in here. Happy to go into more detail if you'd like, but most of these are pretty innocuous. And again, we're not going to see more of these coming up. This is sort of the last piece of coordination between the existing building and the documentation.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Deschaines? Okay, at this point, do we have a motion to allow the chair to vote to change the order, for the change order?
I move the board vote to allow the chairman to sign the change order number 12 in the amount of $164,081.17 for the Grafton Public Library Building Project.
Do I have a second?
Second,
Thank you. Motion made second. Any discussion on the motion for the change order number 12? Okay, not seeing anything. All right, without any further discussion, by roll call vote, please. Mr. Prisby?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Fazio?
I'm sorry, one question just came in. Terry Turgeon is asking, after this change order, how much is still left in the contingency?
I don't have that exact number right in front of me, but it's over $700,000.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
You're welcome.
All right, moving on. All those by roll call vote, please. Mr. Prisby?
Yeah.
Ms. Roy?
Roy, I.
Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, I.
Mr. Alston?
Austin, aye.
Peter Carlson, I declare the motion carried. Thank you very much. We have one other piece here about licensed site professional agreements.
Yep. So real quickly, I always say that I'm not perfect, and this is proof. We got this agreement in from Weston and Sampson. They're the folks that have been dealing with all the environmental issues on the site. So dealing with DEP filings and doing soil samples and water samples and all that stuff. Their original agreement came in at the end of January, just when things were starting to get interesting. The building committee reviewed it and approved it, and then I never brought it to this board. And so things got crazy, and we kept on going, and things moved to virtual meetings, and so I missed it. Subsequent to that, after that, there was an addendum to their agreement. Their agreement was originally based on the scope that we knew, which was the one underground storage tank that had formerly served the library and the remediation to that. Since then, there were, of course, 2 other underground storage tanks and more remediation that had to happen. So they amended their agreement. Their amendment was more than the original agreement because it was actually twice as much work. So that's what these 2 agreements are. This is my full disclosure. I brought both of these went to the building committee. They both got approved. They've been doing a great job. But to be, completely clean about it, you all need to see this too, and you need to know about it and to vote on it. So it was my error, but also I caught my own mistake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does the board have any questions? All right, not seeing any questions. Mr. Fazio, do we have any questions from the public?
No, we do not.
All right, could I get a motion, please?
I move the board vote to allow the chairman to sign the licensed site professional agreements with Weston and Sampson.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All right. Not seeing any. Okay, all those by roll call vote, please. Mr. Frisbee.
Frisbee, aye.
Ms. Roy.
Roy, I.
Mr. Fazio.
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Rothman.
Often I.
Peter Carlson, aye. Clear motion carried. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy, for coming in. Have a great evening.
Thanks, you too.
All right, moving on here. Real quick, can we take up the resignation for election worker Brenda Zaliski?
I move the board vote to, oops, sorry, I thought we were,
We're just gonna do that one real quick, Ms. Roy. Just need a motion to accept her resignation.
I move the board vote to accept the resignation of Brenda Zelinsky as an election worker and send her a letter of thanks.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those by roll call vote. Mr. Frisbee,
Frisbee, aye.
Ms. Roy,
Roy, I.
Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Often,
Often I.
Peter Carlson, aye. Okay, declare the motion carried. Thank you very much. Moving up here, Emergency Management Director. We have Mr. Mead here. Welcome back, Mr. Mead, to Emergency Management.
Well, I never really left. I was a deputy director, so while Nick was here, and Nick moved out of state, so.
All right, thank you. So as you all know, Mr. Mead's been the Emergency Management Director previously for the past year. So tonight, we just need a motion to appoint him back as Emergency Management Director.
I move the board vote to appoint Ray Mead as the Emergency Management Director for an indefinite term.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All right, not seeing any. All those by roll call vote. Mr. Frisbee,
Frisbee, aye.
Ms. Roy,
Roy, I.
Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Often,
Often I.
Peter Carlson, aye. Declare the motion carried. Thanks, Ray, for coming in. Thank you for your service again.
Hey, thank you.
Have a good evening. Okay. Next up, Board of Health vacancy interview for final cabinets and vote for an appointment tonight. So I just want to take this moment and thanks Mr. Mueller for coming in. I understand, some of us had some power issues last Tuesday. I see your power's back on. I want to welcome you and thank you for coming in. So this evening, we have Mr. Mueller coming in. He's last of the three that were presented to us last week by the Board of Health. And I just want to open this up, Mr. Mueller, if you want to give a statement about who you are, what you would bring to the board, and then we can open up the questions for the select board, please.
Okay, I am a general internist who recently retired. I've lived in Grafton for 39 years, and I ran a community health center in Uxbridge, Massachusetts. It was part of the UMass Memorial Medical Center. I believe that I could bring some additional value to the Board of Health, given that experience. I don't know if you want to know about my academic background and that sort of thing, or I think you have a copy of my CV. You're muted at this.
We do.
You're on mute.
You got me. Thank you. All right. People out there playing bingo probably just won. Thank you, Mr. Mueller, for that. Yeah, I did see your information before. At this point, I'll open it up to the board for any questions. Ms. Roy.
Thank you. Have you volunteered on any other boards and committees in town previously?
Not in the town of Grafton. I've been on multiple boards, both at the Milford Regional Hospital and at UMass Memorial, but not at the town level.
Thank you. Mr. Austin?
Yeah, thanks. I just had a couple questions that I've asked all the candidates. First is, how do you see the Board of Health interacting with the schools with regards to reopening? So this has been kind of a hot topic in town, and I'm anticipating that there's a reasonable likelihood that we could have positive tests in the schools, and how do you see the Board of Health interacting with that situation? And second, as we look forward, potentially beyond COVID, what emerging health challenges do you see in Grafton that will need to be addressed by the board? And what particular skills do you bring that would help the board be successful in those endeavors? Thank you.
Okay, well, for the first question, I do obviously think that it's a very important topic, and it's going to become more so as we approach the beginning of the school year. I look upon the Board of Health as really more of a consultative entity in that regard. A lot of these decisions are really going to be made, I think, at a state level, or at least there'll be guidance that will be forthcoming at the state level. I have a daughter who's a kindergarten teacher in Natick, and I can tell you that it's a very, very hot topic in that community, and meetings are ongoing and so forth. I think that one of the big issues with the coronavirus epidemic is that, in fact, a fairly substantial group of people can be totally asymptomatic and yet be contagious. It was thought early on that children were largely, uninvolved in this, but in fact, it appears that they're going to be much more involved. And certainly, I think going back into a school environment is going to potentially test that. I'd shared with the Board of Health members that my dad is 98 years old, and he was positive for coronavirus, and he never developed any symptoms. We figured it was the end of the road for him, but I guess he had different ideas about it. There are lots of things that this has impacted, though. Routine healthcare obviously has been very much impacted. I know my health center, which has 17 doctors, including 8 pediatricians, is struggling to keep up with things like routine immunizations and things of that sort. There were other things, though. There were also very topical things that have largely been put aside, like vaping issues and substance abuse issues and things of that sort, that I think, even though they are not as prevalent, or at least as far as we can tell in our community, or certainly we're not immune from them. But I do think that in fact, having additional medical expertise on the board would be of some benefit.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions they want to ask Mr. Muller? Okay. So thank you for coming and answering the questions. I did read your background, impressive, and I want to thank you for wanting to volunteer, for putting your name out to volunteer for the Board of Health. It's an important board, and I appreciate your willingness to want to serve Grafton. Okay, so at this time, I'll give it up to the committee. So tonight we have on our agenda to appoint a new member. So at this point, we want to have a discussion about the members, who we're feeling, who we're going towards. Was there anyone who would just really just want to make a motion? I'll just leave it open to you guys.
You want me to leave or stay?
Oh, Mr. Muller, you're more than willing to stay. It's a public meeting. You could do whatever it is that you would like to do. It's fine by me. Yeah. All right, anyone? I'll open it up to them. Mr. Hoffman.
Yes, I'd love to see Dr. Muller make it on the Board of Health. I think he's got great clinical experience, which is recommended by the State Department of Health. He's got an impressive resume, and overall, I think he spoke well to the topics. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a motion that we appoint Dr. Muller to the Board of Health.
Second.
All right, I have a motion made and seconded. For your point, any discussion on the motion? Mr. Upton, I want to just comment. I agree with you. I think it's great having Mr. Muller's, or I should say, Dr. Muller's experience on the board. I believe it'd be invaluable to us in navigating, especially the foreseeable future here, while we navigate COVID and other, public health initiatives. So I want to thank you, Mr. Muller, for wanting to step up tonight. And unless anyone else have any other comments that they would like to make, Mr. Prisby.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just briefly. We had, I think, 7 applicants for this one particular opening, which is, I don't know if it's unheard of, but it's in my time on the board and in my time in volunteer work in Grafton, that's a lot for one spot. And on top of that, we had 7 really qualified applicants. Any one of whom, had it just been the one, I would have been perfectly happy with saying, yes, this is someone who's more than capable of filling this role. We had applicants who had had medical experience. We've had applicants who have had practical volunteer experience. We've had applicants that have been very energetic and passionate about serving in Grafton government. I think Dr. Muller will be a fine addition to the Board of Health. I think, you shout out to a couple other people here. I thought it'd be fine. I think Lisa Kelly would have been great. I think Jennifer Maynard would have been great. So, whichever this direction this board wants to go in, I think is fine here. For those who don't get appointed tonight, don't go anywhere. There's lots of volunteer work to be done in Grafton, and these openings have a way of turning people over as people roll off committees and have other responsibilities. So I want to thank everybody for their interest in the position.
Well said. Thank you, Mr. Prisby. Anybody else? Okay. All right, we'll do this by roll call vote. Mr. Prisby.
Prisby, aye.
Ms. Roy.
Roy, aye.
Mr. Fazio.
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Often.
Often aye.
Peter Carlson, aye. Welcome to the Board of Health, Doc. Thank you very much for wanting to volunteer. Ms. Gobbin, you've got your member here. Good luck to you. Let us know how the board can help you out in any way.
Thank you very much, and happy to have you, Dr. Muller.
Yep,
Thank you so much.
Welcome aboard.
Yeah,
Have a great night. Yep.
Thank you.
All right, moving on here. We don't have any appointments. We don't have any new business tonight, but let's move right into select board team reports. Do we have any select board member reports this evening? Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, this might be the best time on the agenda to bring up the goals meeting that we seem to be talking about a lot lately, but the Lions Club is not available for tomorrow evening, so there is not a goals meeting scheduled for tomorrow. And I just wanted, I wanted to make a suggestion to you all, and then just kind of have a conversation about how you want to move forward. So, you know, in this time of COVID, it's a little difficult to find an outdoor space that we can use. So I think the Lions Club would be, especially at the cost of zero, would be a really good location for us to go to. But I'd have to loop back and just see their availability. And then just based on the other priorities that we have on the agenda tonight and working forward with in the next couple of weeks, I was wondering what the board thought about to maybe pushing this out a few weeks into, you know, maybe the first or second week in September after Labor Day, just so we can get through, you know, making decisions on the town administrator search and whatnot, and then we can just sort of focus on the goals meeting after that. I'm open to suggestions and will take direction from any of you.
Thank you, Mr. Fazio. Does anyone have any indication or desire to want to hold it sooner, or do you want to take Mr. Fazio's suggestion and wait till September? Mr. Frisbee.
September works.
All right. Mr. Alton?
I think Ms. Roy had her hand up first.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Roy. Go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say the same thing. I don't mind putting it off till September. I think it might be even cooler days to make it a little easier too.
All right. Mr. Alton?
Yeah, I'd like it sooner than later, I guess, but you know, if we're talking a month, you know, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, thank you. I would agree. I'm thinking maybe tentatively looking at I don't know, the first week of school is going to be ideal. I don't know how people feel about doing it, you know, having it on Wednesday the 9th, if that works for everybody. I know some of us may be preoccupied that following week.
Well, Mr. Chairman, why don't I leave it with this? I will look at the beginning of September. I'll reach out to the Lions Club. I'll get some dates that are available. And then through you, you know, we can let the board know what dates are available, and we'll take it from there. But I think, you know, sooner rather than later, but looking that we only have 2 more weeks in August, I mean, I think we can get to this in, you know, 3 weeks.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mr. Fazio. We'll do that. All right. Any other select board member reports? Ms. Roy?
CIPC met again last week, and they are going to be reaching out because they would like to meet with the select board. The last time CIPC met with the select board was in December 2019, and we kind of left it as possibly updating the charge and just having an overall discussion with the select board and touching base. So we were hoping to do that before the warrant was set for October, if possible. I don't know if there are any dates people thought maybe I could bring back to say, hey, it looks like we're going to meet with the select board on this day.
I could take a look at our calendar and see what we have available. If the board's good, we can have CIPC come in and have that general discussion. We should have it sooner rather than later. I believe if there is any action that you want to take under consideration, I think the deadline is what, mid-September for the warrant to be in?
I think so, yep.
Okay. Does the board have any thoughts on that moving forward? Mr. Fazio?
Could we have them in as soon as next week, or is the schedule already booked?
We can have them in on the 18th. That'll work. Is that, we can definitely make that work into the schedule.
I don't
Okay,
know.
I would just have to reach out to them. We were just cleaning up some of the language that we wanted to share with you guys, and we were planning to meet again on the 20th. So it might be, I mean, if that's all that you guys have available, I can reach out to everybody and see what we can make work, but we would be discussing it with you guys for the first time as a board ourselves. Are you guys comfortable with that?
Mr. Fazio?
Yeah, I mean, I think to let CIPC prep a little more, you know, it would be my suggestion just to let's make it a priority. And, you know, I don't think we're meeting the last week in August, but maybe putting them on the first agenda in September would make sense, just in case we need to have a follow-up meeting or follow-up discussions. We still have time before the warrant.
That sounds good. And last week I mentioned that there was a position open and we had some interest. I didn't know if it's been advertised at all yet, or when we could look to possibly make an appointment for the opening.
It is on the website. So I was gonna wait another week or so and just put my letter of interest in.
There we go.
You're
again. I'll follow up with on that part on the posting, just validate how long it's been out on the web. I can check with the office tomorrow morning and have them just send out a memo for the board to be aware of that. If the 2 weeks is coming up sooner, I want to give you guys that deadline, and then we'll have the discussion on appointment based on the interests that the board will consider at that date of the meeting. All right. And then as for the CIPC date, I'll just wait to hear back after the 20th, Ms. Roy, to see where the committee's at with everything, and then we'll go from there. Okay. Anyone else have any other select board member reports? Okay. Okay. Moving on. We don't have any town administrator reports tonight. Moving on to correspondence. Ms. Roy, do we have anything tonight?
Yes, we do. Karen Francis wrote asking how the select board planned to pay for the TA's severance.
Okay. All right. No other correspondence. That's it. Okay. All right, there nothing. Okay, moving on to discussion items. So wanted to follow up from our Thursday meeting update on temporary town administrator status. So I want to give the board a chance to kind of hear what is happening. So I been receiving some interest from interested parties that would like to fill in for that temporary status with us. I've had about a half a dozen people send in their interest and/or resumes and cover letters attached with their various experiences. One of the things that we didn't really talk about last Thursday was just facilitating, and then how do we want to arrive to a decision sooner rather than later. So I have all this information. I anticipate that if I'm still receiving more solicitations from interested parties, that I'll be receiving them. I wanted to ask the board, how would you like to move forward with this? Like I said, I've got about a half a dozen so far. I just need some direction from you all. Mr. Fazio.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Is this advertised on our website? I'm sorry if I'm naive to that. I don't know if we're advertising it anywhere, or if it's just word of mouth.
I don't believe it is advertised on the web page or website, but I do know that several people who were watching our meeting or watched for the results of this were last Thursday, sent me emails that night and the following Friday. So I anticipate some people were aware that we were discussing this and were interested, other than an advertisement that's on our webpage seeking, an interested party or parties to be a part of this. I don't know if it is or not, I'll be honest with you.
Okay. So I mean, I think having 6 candidates already is great news. But I would just maybe make the suggestion that, if we advertise this, I mean, I think we need to make this decision in, a week, right? To appoint somebody probably at our next meeting. But just for transparency purposes, it might make sense to have this on our town website and, with like a basic scope of work and what we're looking for. And in my opinion, as far as direction on how to choose somebody, I'm I'm unsure, and maybe another board member checked with this. I don't think we need to go through any procurement process because we could just have them be a town employee, which would mean we wouldn't have to go through 30B, but I would just want to double check with council on that. And then, so I think it would just be a matter of us choosing the best candidate.
I would agree with you, Mr. Fazio. One part about the employment status is I believe that they have to be a town employee to be in the temporary position, right? So I think that, in my estimation, the way the charter reads is that that would have to happen in order for the person to have the powers and duties of the TA. Anyone else have any questions? Ms. Roy.
Did we want to prepare a list of questions for each candidate that might mean like how many days a week would you be prepared to work in Grafton? Are you looking more for a part-time position or a full-time position? What's the average salary you command for this position so that we kind of go in there and maybe can whittle out candidates quicker or identify the candidate we're looking for faster, something like that?
Mr. Fazio.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you, I think that's a great idea that Ms. Roy brings up. I want to make mention that I spoke to, there's recruiting firms out there that specifically do recruitment, not necessarily for temporary positions, but for full-time positions. And I don't know if any other board members has looked into this. It's a lot of communities do this when they're looking for a TA. And I made a call to the Collins Center, who's one recruitment center, and I know the town of Grafton has used them. The HR rep happens to live in Shrewsbury. She's very familiar with Grafton, Central Mass, players involved, feels that, and I'm biased, I think we all are living here, but Grafton is a very attractive community. I think we can get some great potential candidates. And if we hire a recruiting firm who's done this 75 times before, they will help us through the whole entire process of asking the right questions, being kind of a, help us with the search committee that, they wouldn't be voters or anything, but they could help us recruit the best candidates and asking the right questions. And they're willing to do that at no cost too for the temporary town administrator as well. So, I called the Collins Center. There are lots of them out there. We could shop around price-wise for that. It would be under $10,000. So again, 30B procurement wouldn't apply for this. But I think, in my opinion, it would be money well spent. This is something that none of us as board members has gone through before, and to kind of have that level of expertise and knowing that from the communities I've seen, it's pretty typical to use a recruiting firm. So just, a thought, I'd be in favor of it. I'd be curious on what other people thought. We could come up with our own questions. We're all smart enough to come up with our own questions for the temporary TA, but if we wanted to loop that all in, we could as well. And also, I'm just going to say one more thing, as far as like our next agenda item, which is the facts, they would help with all that. There's kind of best practices in marketing our town too, to attract the best TA. So, all that would be involved.
All right. Okay. Mr. Frisbee.
Yeah, to that, I in my research for this, I've also spoken with a lot of these temp agencies, and a couple people have been kind enough to put the word out that through the circle, professional circles work like that. If there's an opening, there's only so many towns and communities in Massachusetts that have a town administrator, town manager position, and so they tend to be sort of a tight circle. And a lot of these temp agencies know all the players. So I think it would behoove us to, once the committee that's formed under the charter is put together, to take advantage of that. Because again, why wouldn't you, right? I mean, we're talking about the potential leader of this town for the coming decade. Like I said last time, you want to cast a wide enough net. As far as advertising for this particular spot goes, I know that the MMA, the Massachusetts Municipal Association, has a page for career opportunities. And if you scroll down it, it's like monster.com for municipal types. So I think that's a good idea. I think to put the advertisement out at least that way. I'm not huge anymore on the local newspapers. Whatever everybody else thinks, but we're talking about an advertisement that's probably going to run for the next few days, and then we'll be making a decision next week. So I'm not sure if the Telegram makes sense, but I think an industry publication would make a lot more sense. I think that's where people go for this sort of thing.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Fazio, then Ms. Roy.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you, I would agree with Mr. Prisby's statements. I think MMA would be another great place to advertise from the Collins Center. It's not necessary, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, but I think you're talking about just a temporary status to get through this at this point.
That's right.
Yeah. So we could, we're not required to do any of this, but I just think as far as transparency and getting, a larger pool for our decisions, I mean, MMA is the place. And then also just putting that scope of work on our town website too would make sense. And then, if I think we should make a decision next week.
Ms. Roy.
So I just wanted clarity, since there are kind of two positions we're talking about and a consulting firm has been brought up twice now. Are you interested in having a consultant for both the temporary town administrator as well as the permanent town administrator? Or are you just looking for a consulting firm for the permanent town administrator and we're handling the temporary town administrator through the MMA and the questions we come up with?
Mr. Fazio. Yes.
You want me to answer that? Okay. So in my opinion, it's not going to cost us anymore to use them as for the temporary town administrator, but I do think that we're running out of time. So I do have the woman I spoke to today just sent about an hour ago a copy of an advertisement that we could put out, so we can use that whether we choose to use a recruiter or not. And they recommended hiring a TA for 3 days a week. So she gave me like some basic guidelines around it. So it's really up to this board whether we want to use it. But as far as cost, it's not a consideration. It's really as far as timeline. And if we choose to do that, we would have to make a decision tonight on what firm we'd want to use. And and we don't really have any quotes. So I think that would be the difficult part.
Anybody else? Ms. Roy?
Would you be able to share with us that information sheet that they sent over, like the 3 days a week and any other things and then we can kind of, because I think you're right, it's not going to cost us anything but time, which we kind of don't have the luxury of. So I think it will be on us to formulate these questions and try to get them together for next week, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm happy to send that over right after the meeting. I'll try to do it during the meeting, but I only have one screen, so that might not work out well for me.
Don't kick yourself out of the meeting, Doreen. Anybody else? I've got a couple of, Mr. Often.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I'm definitely in favor of using an agency for our kind of permanent TA. I think based on the kind of time pressure that we have right now, I'm not sure if that necessarily makes sense to engage with an agency to try to bring somebody in, given the fact that we have obviously a considerable amount of interest already. I'm feeling a sense of urgency around getting somebody in place. And so I personally, I'd be in favor of just the board reviewing the resumes that we have, potentially reviewing the information that's available, and then making a decision based on board member input on the agencies that we could use going forward. But for me, I would prefer a scenario where we just as a decision make a decision to go forward with reviewing the resumes and making a decision as far as engaging in negotiations with the preferred candidates.
Mr. Fazio.
So maybe what we could do is any of us, it sounds like Ed and I have spoken to some agencies, we could go ahead and get some requests for quotes next week for all these agencies for the board to review. And I will send over information immediately, like I said, of what I got today. And so maybe we could make that decision next week, as well as choose our temporary TA. And so kind of leaving that out of it, we'll have to plan on our own questions, but we might be able to, like Ed said, they all sort of speak to each other. So I'm sure just through, I'm sure any of these firms would be happy to advise us on the process of, the right questions to ask a temporary TA as well. And then so by next week, we're sort of lined up with the other thing that the Collins Center told me is it should be like a 3 to 4 month timeline from start to finish. And so to me, that was pretty good news as well, thinking about budget season and just the ability that if we were able to work with a competent recruiting firm, that, the timeline would be a lot smoother and probably for us a little quicker too, because they would manage all that. Kind of jumping all over the place.
Yeah, we're kind of going between both agenda items on the discussion part, which is fine. I think it's all germane to the overall discussion, and I'm good with it. Mr. Prisby.
I think one thing to consider, and I'm going to throw this question out there, and I don't know the answer to it, is who makes the call on whether or not there's going to be an agency hired to assist with hiring the permanent town administrator? Because there's us, and then there's the committee that we're mandated to form under the charter that consists of people from school committee, finance committee, library, us, and then the people that the moderator picks. I don't know if that's our call or if that's their call. It might be their call.
Mr. Prisby, I did some research on that, and the way that, and I'm not saying that Grafton is the one and only way of doing this, but in the past, the select board is the one that chooses the firm, because the firm is going to assist the search committee, okay? And then upon the recommendation of that search committee on the finalists, that firm is going to assist the select board with visitation, site visits, interviews, coordination, and so on and so forth. So instead of having 2 of those, right, I'm anticipating that we would, to Ms. DeFazio's recommendation, and I think I'm kind of hearing the agreement overall from the board, that we should probably, depending upon how we go tonight, start preparing basically requests for services for recruitment for assisting permanent town administration appointment, which I will say is separate from the one. The temporary one, to your point, is just finding someone to hold everything over for the next few months, while the committee has an opportunity working with the firm to put the right advertisement out there, to do all the due diligence, dot all the I's, cross all the T's, basically manage all of the federal, state guidelines when it comes to hiring, especially in the workplace. So we would have that. And in addition to that, we do have a part-time to a full-time human resources assistant here within the town offices. And I would recommend that the search committee take advantage of those services as well, providing any type of logistical support that's necessary. And I think that's again, that's way further down the road, but I just wanted to kind of lay out what we have for resources today is what we didn't have over 12 years ago when we went through this last process. I think from a temporary TA standpoint, I've got a half a dozen candidates, and like I said, just reading over them, all of them have numerous years of experience in managing towns. Some have done it on a permanent basis. Some others are just doing this on a part-time basis because of just their situation that they're in today. So I want to kind of go back to the first part there, and I want to figure out, satisfy my curiosity about how do we get to that next step. I've got this information. If I go and put this ad out on the MMA website for temp, I think we're going to delay this, and it's going to be a week or two before, and we're going to get all this information. If the board is, satisfied, and I can forward the 6 contacts that I have, to your point, we can bring in, any one of them that wants to come in at our next meeting, we can invite them on Tuesday to say, can you answer some consistent questions from all the board members with regards to being the temporary TA? Because I do know from, and I know this is kind of like a rule somewhere, but I'm not quite sure, where this derived from. But when we interviewed, the superintendent, we all had to ask the same questions for all the candidates. And I found that extremely limiting because each candidate brings unique skill sets and brings something to the table, especially in a temporary standpoint. But so be it. That's a bridge we can cross later. But in terms of just kind of keeping in line with what we've done in the past, again, we have to facilitate those questions, have them in advance. Each one of us asks a question or two, and it's consistent across, wherever the candidates can make it for next Tuesday, and then we can make a decision to enter into an agreement for someone to stay in the temporary standpoint. So Mr. Fazio, you're right about, what they're recommending, like, 3 to 4 months to finish the process. I do know last time that when we went through this, it took a lot longer, and the board prior to us back in 2009, 2010 appointed someone beyond 9 months. So I just want to let you know that if something were to happen or something happens, like we're not getting good candidates or we feel like we're underwhelmed, we're under no obligation to close it in 3 to 4 months. Okay, this is ultimately our appointment based on the, with the input from the search committee. So I just wanted to make sure that, although we want to kind of do this sooner rather than later, I personally don't want to see myself being forced to make a decision who I feel, we're not getting a good canvassing of appropriate candidates for the permanent position going forward. So besides that, going forward, I kind of went on a diatribe there. How do we want to handle the temporary status of the candidates that I have thus far that have solicited their input or solicited their interest? Mr. Prisby and then Mr. Often.
Is it possible to send us the information that you have so far, put it in a packet, and allow us to ask questions of the candidates next Thursday or next Tuesday? And if we don't feel like we've got someone we're comfortable with, continue to solicit applications. So, I mean, the MMA thing is $75. If we pay $75 to advertise it and you get even 3 more applications for Tuesday, that seems worthwhile. It's just hard for me to say right now because you might have half a dozen resumes that are fantastic, or you might have half a dozen that make me wish that we had advertised this. So I'm not really sure.
What's the board wish to do? Mr. Often.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of an approach where we, as a board, all get resumes to look at, so we can see the CVs and see the quality of the candidates and what kind of is available. And then I don't see why we couldn't just submit 2 or 3 questions each to you as a chair, and you send those along to the candidates and get some feedback before our next meeting. If we're happy with the quality of the responses and the resumes that we're getting, that we could make a decision in our next meeting. And if not, we could make a decision as a board to kind of continue the process. But I do like the approach of trying to get as much information as possible to prepare this board for making the decision if we're comfortable with any of the candidates that we see and the responses that they give in our next meeting. For me, we need somebody who is going to hold the wheel steady, if you will, for the next few months. But one of the discussion points that really moved me in our last discussion was that we want to be setting up a situation for hiring and preparing the hiring committee with as inclusive and open a field of candidates as possible. That we want to be very clear that this is a temporary position and moving forward under those conditions. So I'd be in favor of just having each of the board members send you 2 or 3 questions, compiling those, getting them out to the candidates that we have already. Hopefully in advance of our next meeting, having those answers and all the resumes in our hands to make a decision.
Any further discussion on this? Ms. DeFazio and then Ms. Roy.
Ms. Roy had her hand up
You
first,
both kind of simultaneously,
No,
but you
but-
were first, Doreen.
but she did.
Oh, she did. I apologize.
When Matt
Ms.
had
Roy,
his hand up,
please.
so I'll wait.
I guess my only thing that I'm thinking about now is if we did put it on the MMA for our temporary town administrator, if we inadvertently collected somebody who might be better suited for our permanent search. You know what I mean? If they threw their hat in thinking that, oh, I would love to work in Grafton for a longer period of time, and we didn't have a way to cipher that out for them before they put their hat in this way. This current amount of applicants that you have was more of a word of mouth. They realize this is a temporary, from my understanding, appointment for them, and then they would move on.
That's how I'm understanding it too, Ms. Roy. Okay. So Ms. Roy, you're in favor of putting an ad out on MMA or not MMA? I'm sorry.
No, I guess I'm thinking over in my head, and I would be concerned putting it on the MMA for the temporary town administrator, thinking that we might accidentally attract good candidates that would be for the other pool for the I hate that there's no good term for these positions, right? We have our temporary town administrator and then our more permanent town administrator. But that's what I'm trying to say.
Yep. Okay. Ms. DeFazio.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So one suggestion to Colleen's point that was made through the Collins Center, which I know was not done last time. It's my understanding that the last search committee 13 years ago had Mr. McInerney as a temporary and then hired him into the role. And it was suggested to me today that we do not do that as a board, that we make it clear in the advertisement to our temporary, as Colleen is stating, that this is a temporary position. And if you're applying for this position, you're not applying for the forever town administrator, I'll call it, role. So I don't know the exact reasoning on it, but I will say, since I've done this 0 times and they've done this about 75 times, that I'll take their word for it. Like, you pool the candidates differently and you get different applicants that way. So again, I do have some paperwork that I will send along as soon as we get off of Zoom tonight that I think has some structured sentences. And so I would be in favor of putting, obviously keeping the candidates that we have that have already applied, but also, we'd have to communicate and make that clear to them. And then secondly, putting it on Mass Municipal Association website just until next Monday, just for a couple of days, and also our town website. And that will give us some more transparency. It might give us a couple extra applicants, but we're also kind of clarifying the scope of work of what we're doing. And then to Matt's point too, we have the time to sort of look at who these candidates are. We may or may not get some other stellar candidates, but I think, we've kind of, within doing that in a short amount of time, we're able to stick with our timeline, but we're also able to get the message out there that this is what Grafton's looking to do. And it's also sort of telling people we're going to be looking for a forever TA, so if we advertise for an interim and that's on MMA, people who are interested are going to be looking for eventually that advertisement for a full-time, permanent, whatever we want to call it, TA.
All right. Okay, so a couple of takeaways here. I'm going to get at least two questions from each of you, maybe 3, submitted to me to compile, put together, assist or put together part of that packet for next Tuesday. Invite the candidates that I currently have today to the meeting next Tuesday, and we'll review it. If we don't find anything that we like, then maybe to your point, we go on and seek further solicitations from others. Right? Is that the direction where we're going, Mr. Often?
Yeah, I'm in strong support of what Doreen's suggesting. So I think I would like to see something put out on MMA to advertise both that we're looking for a temporary TA with an expectation that that temporary TA wouldn't necessarily be the TA that we would include in the search process. to make a clear distinction that this is a temporary kind of time-bound position that we're advertising for, but to also signal within the MMA community that, hey, Grafton's got an upcoming position that's going to be open for a permanent TA. It's setting up those conditions and creating this environment where we're getting the best possible candidates. To me, kind of as we think about the long-term goals of the town, the most important for sure as we think about this whole process. So I'd be in favor of putting something up on the MMA website, but also making sure that we have that clear language in there.
Great. Okay. Is that what I'm understanding? Everyone's good with that? Okay, then I'm going to tell you right now, guys, I'm not going to be ready for next Tuesday. So it's a lot to have out there. We got to get it out the MMA site. To Doreen's point, we got to put out a statement about what it is we're looking for and word it in a way that's appropriate. Continue soliciting at least for a few more days. And I'm just saying from a logistics standpoint, let's say we get 30 interested parties. Is it the board's wish that they want to review 30 candidates at a meeting? How do you want to pare this down, Mr. Prisby?
My suggestion in that case would be for us to review the materials and then come up with a manageable list of people that we can reasonably bring in. Like anything else, you have to strike a balance between wanting to be thorough and get the absolute best candidate and wanting to obviously realize that this is a temporary role and we've got to get this done. So if you get 30 resumes, then let's sit down and make nominations for a number that the board feels comfortable with interviewing, and then, have another meeting within a couple days to bring people in for an interview.
All right. Anybody else have any comments on that? Do we want to set a deadline when we're going to stop receiving information? Mr. Fazio.
Monday.
Okay.
So I was able to just send the board this information from the Collins Center. And again, we don't have to, we're not committing to using them at this point, but I think as a reference for the temporary TA, it could, give us a good start on advertising. And so I'd be happy to volunteer as vice chair, Peter, if you want me to work with MMA and the town administrator's office tomorrow on getting an advertisement out. I'm happy to do that.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much for offering to do that. That's helpful for me. I'm going to be out of pocket most of the day tomorrow, and I'm taking time off Thursday and Friday and Monday of next week just for some paid time off. So I'm indebted to you. Thank you for doing that. Does anyone have any objections to that? Any questions? Ms. Roy.
Would it be helpful to post for a meeting possibly Monday night for us to review all of the information that came in and just kind of run it over before we, like you said, to your point, if 30 candidates apply, then it'll give us a time to chisel it down together and then invite who we want to interview for Tuesday, so we feel a little bit more prepared. I'm thinking very short meeting for Monday, just one agenda item, but just to whittle away all the information that we collected for the remainder of the week.
I'm not going to be here Monday, Ms. Roy, so this meeting will be with 4 of you. Mr. Fazio.
I'm happy to do that and run that meeting if we want to do that. I think I also have a library building committee earlier that day, so it would just be a time thing for me. But they meet early. They meet about 5 o'clock, so I'd be done by 6.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna put it out there, stop solicitations by Monday by, let's say, 5 p.m. Who should be charged with receiving these solicitations and preparing the packet? Do you want me to have the town administrator's office work on that and put it all together for us? Mr. DeFazio.
I would say yes, but attention, select board.
Okay. All right, so you'll handle that on your end. Okay, great. Okay. Next up, I wanted to talk about, we talked about putting an ad out there and solicitation for services to assist with the search and the interview and the hiring of our next permanent town administrator. Does the board wish to put an advertisement out and start soliciting information on prospective consultants or firms to assist with that process? Any comments on that, Mr. Fazio?
We don't necessarily have to advertise. It's not a requirement. So if we feel comfortable as a board just doing a Google search, and it sounds like, Mr. Prisby and I have already done a little research. We could, like I said earlier in the conversation, we could just get quotes and, choose the lowest quote, which would probably be the smart thing to do. But also just, I'm sure they're very used to sending proposals to select boards. So if we want to skip the advertisement part, we might be able to do that. I'm sure it sounds like Ed said earlier, they all work together, that they're all going to be competitive. I don't really think we can go wrong. I think, that we should choose one.
So Mr. Fazio, I don't know what I don't know on that, right? So on the firm that's going to support the search process and then assist with setting up interviews and logistics with the finalists, I want to know personally what we're buying, right? I want to know what the deliverables are. I'm in favor of looking for the most appropriate firm to assist Grafton with this, but at the same time, personally, I'd like to know what I know. And I know you guys can go out and Google and ask for a bunch of these to just submit some proposals, but personally, I would like to see what's out there. I do know that there's firms in Massachusetts that just specialize in this. I want to make sure, and I'm sure all of them are listening to this tonight or waiting for the update on this meeting, right? But I don't know what I don't know. So personally, if the board wishes to go that route, I'm fine with it, but that's just my only objection. So I'm in favor of the firm. I'm in favor of getting what we can, but I want to see what else is out there. I don't know how the rest of the board feels. Mr. Fazio.
I'm fine with that, Peter. I think another way to go would be we could get references from other communities. Westboro just went through a change, and I think in the past year, I don't know, time flies, maybe it's longer than that. But we could check out a couple other communities too and get references. And I don't know if that would appease that or not. If you want to advertise, I'm fine with that. I'm thinking of timeline too, and again, we might end up with 30. And when we only need 3.
I agree. Does the board have any other desire for that, or do they want to just get what we have? I'm hearing silence, so Ms. Roy and Mr. Prisby.
Where would you, so you're talking about advertising to hire the consultant for our more permanent town administrator. Is that what you would like to see happen, Peter, versus just the word of mouth that I know I spoke to one in Mr. Prisby and Mr. Fazio. So there's at least 3 right there, unless we've talked to multiple people, but you would feel more comfortable advertising. I just wonder, where would you advertise for such a position? On our town website, on the MMA, in the newspaper? I feel like it's such a small group of people that would do this. Where are you going to catch their attention?
Yeah, so I'll leave that to the procurement officer about where to best advertise that. Again, it's just me advertising for a period. Wherever we advertise it is fine, and just go through that open process. So I'm really indifferent as to where it gets advertised. But I think from from my perspective, I would like to see us advertise for it, get whatever we can, and have proposals in front of us to review. And I think if we take the same approach like all of you have suggested for looking for the temporary town administrator, this shouldn't be a problem. Maybe we do get 3 to Mr. Fazio's point. Mr. Fazio, yeah.
You want me to take that on as well? And I'll advertise that at the same time as the temporary TA
Is the board okay with that?
on MMA and our town website?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. All right, I'm seeing some nod of the head. Mr. Often, you gave you a thumbs up, correct? Mr. Fazio, is that acceptable to you? And Ms. Roy? There we go. All right. Thanks, Doreen, for doing that. I appreciate that. So there's two things down. Develop an FAQ for the webpage regarding development, of what the public can expect. I wanted to bring that up. Mr. Fazio.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, do you want me to read the Q&As before we move on to
Let
the
me
next?
just kind of go through this. Let's have our discussion first, and let's see if we answer any
Great.
of these
Okay.
things. Okay. Yeah, thank you. But yes, we'll get to that shortly. On the FAQ part, I wanted to just open that up to the board on its thoughts about having an area for the webpage, just describing the process so the public has one place to look. They're not going to 4 different areas trying to piece all this together. Mr. Fazio.
I love the idea. I just don't know the logistics of how we would do it. So I don't know if anyone else has any ideas on that, but I think a good example is what the school committee has been doing with COVID and opening schools and communicating really well to the public. And I think we have an opportunity as a board to keep open lines of communication. And I just, it's of course time consuming, and I'm not one who governs on Facebook or social media in general. So I don't know if we're talking about a website, if we're talking about answering questions live, or what people had in mind. But I do really like the idea.
Mr. Prisby, Mr. Often.
So I don't know that I would go so far as a Facebook page for this, because I think, one of the things we have to bear in mind again is we're dealing with a human resources issue. And as with our last human resources issue that we dealt with, there's only so much that you can say. And when you're going to hire somebody, only so much that you would want to say about any particular candidates. But I think setting people's expectations reasonably is a good idea at this point, and answering their questions as best we can in advance is a good idea. So for instance, I think any FAQ begins with, okay, what does the charter say? And what do our bylaws say about the hiring process for a potential town administrator? Again, if people are interested in participating in the process and they're not already on either the select board, the school committee, finance committee, or I think it's the library trustees, then they should reach out to Dan Conca. Okay, so all that information should be on there about what the committee does. The timeline should be on there about how long we think this is going to take. And then we have to have this discussion first about, what we consider to be our reasonable hiring process. So we already know that we're going to tackle the temporary town administrator position beginning next week. And then after that, we're going to put together the search committee. Well, how long does that take to put together? What's Dan Conca's timeline for soliciting applications for the permanent committee? And then once that committee holds its first meeting, then how long is that going to take? There are things that we haven't had a discussion about yet, but I think we should.
We're talking about that tonight, Mr. Prisby.
Okay. So, once we have that in, then we should summarize that and put it on a webpage. And then, just be discreet about it, understanding that, people, again, like I said last week, people who are making these applications, they're not doing it necessarily out of public view, but I don't think they're looking to be the topic of somebody's Facebook discussion either, right? That's not fair to ask of somebody who's coming into a job that they don't have yet. So, to the best that we can to answer people's questions, I think that's what we should do.
Ms. Roy? Or was it Mr. Often? I'm sorry. Was it Mr. Often next? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah, look, I really have seen a lot of value in what the superintendent and the school committee have been doing on Facebook. I have been a little frustrated that this board hasn't been able to be more effective in communicating the things that are before us, our decision-making, answering questions. We've got a lot going on right now between the fire department, the town administrator situation and whatnot. And it's been challenging, I guess, for me to see one model with the schools which has been so open and so communicative, and, you know, they don't have all the answers, right? That's sort of the story of the superintendent and the school committee, is that they don't have answers, but they're doing the best that they can to try to communicate the information that they do have that's available. And I don't know that necessarily this board and the town's been as good as it can be in terms of communicating the information that we have. So I don't know if now's the time. Maybe it's better to discuss this in our goals meeting, but I definitely would like a better process for us to be getting the word out in terms of what's happening, and whatever information we do have that we can communicate to the public, that are going to have questions on a variety of things. That goes for now and into the future. So I don't know, maybe it would be better to wait until we have a temporary town administrator, and then have some discussions with that temporary TA to move forward with a different approach to the way we communicate things. Personally, I haven't been in favor of, we've been putting out daily press releases. To me, that's kind of a push communication. It's not very interactive. These QAs, they're okay. But we've got, you know, Terry Turgeon has just posted 11 questions, you know, it's some of which are, what is a forever TA? Good for you, Doreen. Like, to me, I feel kind of harassed by, and it's disruptive to see that in the Q&A. I would never accept that in a public meeting. I would have asked Terry to leave. It's just not, you know, it's not an effective process to me, what's going on right now. So I'd like to see this improve. I'd like to see the board make some decisions going forward on how we better engage with the public, aside from the Q&A that we have available to us in the moment. For me, I think we've got a lot of different avenues to do that. And I think I would love to see some modernization of our engagement with the community. I don't think it's adequate. We're doing what we're doing right now.
Okay. Anybody else? So on the FAQ part of the site, so from the logistics standpoint, Mr. Fazio, going back to your original question, I did talk with Ms. Hyde in our TA office, and she's familiar with how to set up the web pages and make edits and adjust them on behalf of us. I think it's very important to have like a single web presence, so that way, you know, to your point, Mr. Prisby, you know, we go back and point people to like here's all the, you know, the 101s of the FAQs on this process. To your point, the committee makeup, how it's governed by our charter and bylaws, what the process is. And then as we add, as the committee gets formed, the search committee obviously I would envision would have input as to, you know, where are they with the process, and they can update that one area. And to your point, people can then share that out however they want to say, hey, I'm in the know. Hey, look, I saw the question, answer to your, you know, here's the answer to your question that they see online. Because that seems to be where a majority of people are communicating and really getting information these days. So I do agree with you, Mr. Often, that there's got to be a better way. I think that is a discussion we should have during goals. But I think going back to what I'm trying to see, so I can give some direction to the TA's office about how can they support and assist us in the town of Grafton with this process, but more importantly, how do they assist the search committee going forward? So no one seems to be objected to an FAQ page. I understand we don't want it really necessarily interactive, like a two-way communication where board members could be responding and so on and so forth. But I'm kind of getting that sense that you got the idea of this is good, and this is what you wanted, and this is acceptable. Mr. Fazio.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea, like I stated before, and I think a recruitment firm will also help us as far as the TA guidelines and maybe formulate some questions and answers we haven't thought of yet. But also, I think Mr. Often brings up some really great points, and we sort of dove into Zoom world and pandemic world and have just, have sort of gotten ourselves situated over the past few months, and it is very different to not hold a public meeting and how we get information out there. So, maybe we could have that, even aside from a goals meeting, just a separate conversation on how we as a board want to start communicating better with the public beyond Q&A link during board meetings. And what does that look like? Does it look like social media? Does it look like maybe our own website page that we update on a weekly basis, that's attached to the Grafton website? I'm sure other communities are struggling with this too. And that's just something we've really haven't addressed because I don't think there was a need pre-COVID, but I definitely see a gap in it now. And I agree. I think it's an important discussion that we have sooner than later.
Okay. Thanks. Before we get to the Q&A, the last thing I want to ask the board about moving forward is, formalizing a charge for the search committee and getting that publicized out there. To your point, Mr. Prisby, outlining and communicating with all of the boards officially that the board is going to be, adopting a search committee with a charge, so they can, put forward their representatives, and then obviously let Mr. Conklin, our town moderator, know that he's got to put out, or use this as an advertisement to look for 3 members of the public to broaden the representation and the demographic of the committee. So going forward with that, is that something that we want to discuss tonight, setting that forward? Do we want me to just kind of create a charge and send that out and we can decide on it next week? Just what's the wish of the board tonight?
Mr. Chair.
Prisby, yes.
My initial thought on this would be to have us instruct you to create a charge while simultaneously reaching out to the town moderator and the chairs of the committees that are identified in the charter for the search committee, and formally make them aware that we will be forming this committee, and that they should watch for our charge to be delivered to them after next week's meeting.
Does that seem reasonable to everybody? That seem good? Ms. Roy?
It does, but you've already signaled to us that you're on a time crunch. Is that something that you feel comfortable taking on?
So I've kind of taken the due diligence in that, and I've reached out to Ms. Ide this week and asked her if she can find, the original charge that was done 12 years ago, and look for that for the search committee. And I would like to take that and just, make sure it's in alignment with what our overall discussion is tonight, so I can, represent what we need from that committee, which is pretty straightforward. But, make sure that, I haven't read it yet, but she's looking for it still. That it includes that you will work with a search committee. The search committee will be doing X, Y, Z. The select board will be, I just want them to know that that's very clear in the charge. So people who are, coming into that committee, when we look at it and review it and approve it, they know what the expectations are. But yeah, it's something, to answer your question, yeah, it's something I've already started. Yeah. Could have saved you 5 minutes of your time there. Any other discussion on the search committee? So we'll bring that back for, yes, Ms. Roy.
Just for final clarifications, are we going to include timelines on this for when we formally reach out to all the other boards and committees saying, hey, please get me your nomination within the next 2 weeks, because after that, the moderator makes his appointment after that, because now we could be a month in and we haven't even looked at candidates yet. And I don't want to be burning time.
Okay, yeah, I would agree with that. I think I'm getting some nods of the head here. That's a really good question. So let's work backwards, okay? When does the board wish to have this committee formalized and start working on this process? Mr. Prisby.
August 31st at the latest.
Okay, there's a problem with that.
I knew there would be. Tell me what that is.
Yeah, there is. Just the general, just my concern. It's not a problem. It's my problem. I should say it's personal. It's not like a problem that the board has. That doesn't give us full 2 weeks to advertise for this, right? And I think, just given the history of everything, let's say we adopt the charge on the 18th, okay? Realistically, by the time it goes out in the webpage, it'll be the 19th or the 20th at the latest. You're talking about the 3rd of September being the 14-day period, 2-week notice, right? If I may make a suggestion, to your point, perhaps we make it no later than the 8th of September.
That's fair. That works.
Okay. All right. That's everyone soliciting, and that's the town moderator. Let's say the town moderator doesn't have 3 people. Let's say there's only 1 person who has an interest, which I don't think is likely. We can cross that bridge when we get to it, but just keep in mind that that's a logistical item that we may have to postpone formally putting this committee together. Okay, Mr. Fazio.
I was just going to say that timeline would work well too with if we work parallel with a recruitment firm that could, help us start advertising immediately if we make that decision at the next meeting. And we sign a contract to work with a recruiter. They can go right ahead and we can say we'll have a search committee ready for the 8th. And so if just preparing the search committee that we are going to be, interviewing as soon as makes sense, which will probably be mid-September, end of September at the latest. Because if we can get that 14-day advertisement out before the 8th, that's what I'm working off of.
Sounds good. Okay, we'll have it done for the 8th, and that will be the direction. So we'll discuss it and vote to ratify that charge formally on the 18th. It'll go out on the webpage, hopefully, on the 19th, I would say, the next business day. 2 weeks out is the 2nd, and then our next meeting would be on September 8th, and we would then, be ready, and that gives them enough time to Mr. Prisby's request. Okay. Any other questions on the timeline on the search committee? Ms. Roy and then Mr. Fazio.
Can we just add to the agenda that night when we adopt the charge that we'll select our committee member appointment as well that night?
I was kind of hoping we'd do that on the 1st.
Why wait?
I'm sorry, Ms. Roy?
Wondering why we would wait.
No, I just figure it's our appointment. It's our representative, so there's nothing preventing us from, selecting who that is. I mean, technically, we can be ready at the next meeting if you wish.
That's what I'm asking. If we can add to the agenda on the 18th, where we adopt the charge and then we make take an
see, yeah.
action.
I'm sorry, I was looking at September for some reason, not August. Yes, we can add that to the agenda on the 18th. Okay. All right. I think I covered everything I needed to cover in that discussion. Mr. Fazio.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just, I never claim to know everything. So I just want to make sure I have a clear understanding of what the charter says with this search committee too. And that is that these separate committees are going to appoint their own people, right? It's not up to the select board to appoint. Okay, just making sure. That's how I read it and understood it, but I just want to make sure I understood. Thank you.
That's correct. Yep, precisely. Yeah, and the moderator will select, if you read that part of the bylaw, based on the, those submissions, will submit 3 people to, basically cover the full demographic and represent, a more broader representation of the community. So that's in there too. Yeah, exactly. All right. Anything else before we get to Q&A? Mr. Fazio, do you have any on a Q&A?
I do.
Okay.
Okay. So Terry Turgeon, what is the town's policy for answering questions from residents, taxpayers? Okay. So Terry, we announce this at the beginning of every meeting. Our policy for answering questions is that the board has its discussion first, and hopefully we've answered a lot of your questions in our discussion. And then we always go through the Q&A at the end of the agenda item to see if there's any additional questions from the public. So I hope that clarifies things a little for you. So, okay. So some of these aren't really valid questions, Terry. Have you already had an inside candidate? We can really not talk about who our candidates are yet. Oh, unless you already have an inside candidate. So if you're referring to the assistant town administrator, again, that's really not for the board to discuss. A decision was made last week, and we are moving forward with the decision of the board, which is to choose an outside candidate.
Corey, could I just jump in there for a second? Just to, that's a good answer, and I think it's on point. But to the best of my knowledge, there's nobody in this meeting that has a secret candidate for either the temporary TA position or the permanent one. I know I don't. I saw that online. I'll tell you right now, the answer is no. From my perspective, I don't know what's in everybody else's head, but rest assured, I meant what I said last week, and no one, and especially Terry, has ever accused me of lying to them. Okay, say what you want about me, but that's never happened. So no, I don't have anybody in mind for this. I'm interested, like I said last week, in casting a wide net. So that's my answer to that. And I hope I don't have to answer that question again.
Just for the board's record too, yeah, I would agree with both of your statement too. When I read something like that, we just basically, had people submit their interest last week from a variety of you, from, Mr. Fazio reaching out to some people, Ms. Roy, Mr. Prisby, Mr. Often. I don't know if you did. You didn't mention that. I certainly didn't, but anyway, I just want to let you know that we're getting more candidates. So, to answer that question, no, there isn't anyone on the inside. Thank you.
And I'll also add that I think that, that's why we have a charter, and that's why we have bylaws, and that's why we have a search committee. And so it's not one person's decision to decide. And then, as far as where I stand, I've spoken my piece, and it's, as far as how I feel, I've communicated how I feel but it's still a 5-member board, and this is the decision of the board. And as I stated before, we're going to move forward as a 5-member board and make the best decisions for the town. So regardless of whether or not one board member or more disagrees with the process, when a decision is made, we move forward with that decision. So, and I'm looking forward to working with my board members on helping choose the best future town administrator for our community. So, and I think we all feel the same way, and we're all on the same page, and that's really what we're looking to do at this point. Okay, so you made a couple comments, Terry. Thanks for the good for you, Doreen. I don't know what that was for, but you're welcome. Thank you. Does MMA help with any of this? Like MASC would help with school committee superintendent openings. Peter, I don't know if you know.
So I don't think MMA, it does it formally like MASC, but I'll have to double check. They're basically, almost similar in nature with both the lobbying arms and just assisting. MMA does more for the select board. MASC stands for, Massachusetts Association of School Committees. It's their group. And the last time we did this, just so you guys know, is that MASC did assist with the search. We had a division chair out in the Springfield area who assisted, I think it was 9 members with the screening process, and then presented their finalists to the school committee at that time, and then assisted us with the interviews and doing the walkthroughs and everything that I was talking about earlier. So yeah, they do. That's what they did for us. I'm not sure if MMA has something similar. So.
Thank you, Peter. So Terry, these are all from Terry Turgeon. I don't keep saying her name, but these are all from Terry. So what is a forever TA? Terry, I think us as a board needs to find a better way to state that. I said forever TA too, and probably no one's a forever TA. So we'll work on our language and make it clear so that the public knows what we're talking about. So obviously temporary TA would be someone who would come in 3 days a week and sort of bridge the gap between our last town administrator and the next town administrator that this search committee decides to hire. So we will work on a better term than forever TA. And what is the Board of Selectmen policy regarding answering questions from residents? I already answered that. I'm not going to say anything disparaging about my fellow board members in comments, so I'm going to skip over some of those. Let's see. Matt, did you want to chime in? You have-
Sure. Maybe we can just talk about this at a board. I'm tired of this. Week after week.
Mr. Upton, we can talk about it the next meeting. I'll put it on the agenda for a discussion item, and we'll talk
Please.
about how the board wants to manage the Q&A for these Zoom meetings going
Thank
forward.
you.
I just need some direction from the board on how to act on behalf of your chair.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up then because they're all really just based on not recognizing the questions. And Terry, I really hope that I answered your question and our policy moving forward. So, and just to, Mr. Carlson has made this clear in the beginning of every meeting, but just to sort of reiterate at this point, we put together a policy really to help us with discussion, and then just like we would do in a public meeting when we were all in person, that the chair would recognize people and call them up to the podium after the board had a discussion. And so typically it would be a question, and a question that has not been answered by the board. So having all of these sort of comments back to back is really not useful to the discussion. And I think it sounds like we're going to talk about that in more detail in a future agenda. If you have specific questions regarding the agenda item, you're always welcome to ask, but just sort of badgering the board on not recognizing questions, that's really not fair since we set a policy for it.
Okay. All right, I think that wraps up majority of the items. We don't have any meeting minutes tonight. By the way, Dorian, thank you for going through that tonight and managing the Q&A. It's much appreciated. I'm sure the rest of the board feels the same way. I know it can be a distraction because you'd want to be a part of the discussion, and I hope everyone can think about how we can better adopt some better practices at the next meeting to have a better process that works for everybody. Thank you. Okay, so we do have a perfect reason to go into executive session tonight to approve prior meeting minutes. And if Ms. Roy, if you could read a motion into the record.
I move the board to enter into executive session in accordance with the Open Meeting Law, Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21A, pursuant to approve prior meeting minutes. Should I include a part about how we'll enter back in a regular session just to adjourn?
That's fine, yes.
I just included that part.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second? Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? All those by roll call vote. Ms. Roy,
Roy, aye.
Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, aye.
Mr. Often,
Often aye.
Mr. Prisby.
Aye.
Peter Carlson, aye. Thank you very much, everybody. We will only be re-entering into open session for the purposes of final adjournment for the meeting. I want to thank everybody. Have a great evening.